as January is coming to a close, we are reaching the end of our Landlord 2020 Vision campaign. Just a few more days to go, but we've kept the best till last. And joining me now, I am with the lovely Kate Faulkner, industry commentator and analyst. And Kate, we've been at the first ever inaugural Habito buy-to-let meetup. We've had a full house of landlords. So gratifying to see landlords coming out to get education, because it's so important in 2020.
Yeah, it is, and we've seen tragic cases. The poor guy that committed suicide because he'd spent 13 grand on property education, didn't get delivered, what's really important to understand is that actually you can come to events like this, kindly funded by Habito, and you can get really good advice free of charge.
No, I noticed at the beginning of your presentation you did mention the very sad case of Danny Butcher, who, let's not kid around here, 13,000 is actually a deposit on a property.
It is. Yeah, it absolutely is, and there are no secrets. I don't know who invented this secrets of property. It's actually one of the most straightforward things. If it was that complicated, I couldn't do anything.
Well, my famous saying is it's like buying a ticket to see a unicorn. So many of these trainers are saying you don't need any money to invest in property, and we both know, I'm sorry, but that's utter nonsense.
No, it is utter nonsense, because if you buy a property with no money down and the boiler goes, now what you do? I mean, it's that simple. This is not a complicated sector. And you've got to know what you're doing, and if you're buying it with no money, then, well, how are you going to fix stuff? And over and above that, how are you going to make sure you get good tax advice, etc.? It's just, you have to have money behind you. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.
Well, as you say, there's many free resources out there. Tonight, a good example where we've had your presentation, and we have a separate video for that, so check that out on our YouTube channel. But Kate, going to our 2020 Vision campaign, I actually found that your presentation kind of prompted what I would ask you, because everything that you were really talking about, you were giving some very good pointers for landlords to kind of future-proof themselves. And that's going to be so important going forwards.
Yeah, I don't think all landlords understand that actually politically there's a lot changing, and you've got to, the hardest thing about buy-to-let is not getting a deal, it's not finding a tenant. The hardest thing is keeping up with the legislation. It is really, really difficult, and sometimes you've got to run ahead of it. So, for example, they are going to be bringing in fairly quickly, we think, the requirement for a 5-year electrical safety check. I know there's a shortage of electricians, so I'm very lucky, I've got a very good one locally. But most people haven't and don't even know who to call. My advice is get them in now, don't wait for legislation, and don't do the minimum for legislation. So another one is, for example, and it's an absolute win-win for landlords, the government, and indeed for tenants. Get your EPC rating of your property, if you can, up to C. Because that's the long-term aim of the government. It's David Attenborough's what he wants us all to do, so let's go and look after David Attenborough and deliver what he wants us to do, because that's got to be a good thing. But
can I just jump in there, Kate?
Sure.
Because I think the MEES thing is very important. A lot of landlords don't realise that in future, if they don't have a C rating or above, they won't be able to rent their property. And if they're doing works now is the time to spend that little bit of extra money and get up to a C rating, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and don't see it as a cost. See it as, because what if utility bills are going up, your tenant has to spend more on those. So guess what? If, because you've made the property cheaper to heat and provide hot water, they've got more money to pay your rent, or they're more likely to pay you your rent. So this is an absolute win-win, and it could potentially increase the value of your property, or certainly hold its value better than others, so make it easier to sell when you want to. There is no excuse not to get that EPC rating as high as you possibly can, and certainly for most properties you can do that to a C level, so just get on with it.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I think the other thing that you mentioned, obviously Section 21 is going to be going. We definitely see that direction of travel. I've already overheard landlords at meetings such as the one we're at tonight saying, well, I'm going to really make my tenant referencing much more robust now. And again, that's kind of future-proofing for when Section 21 does eventually disappear.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you're running a business, and the government's going to make rule changes. You might like some of them, you might not like some of them. The risk of Section 21 going is that they don't put in a court procedure that allows a landlord to let a tenant go, for example, if they're not paying the rent, nuisance to neighbours, etc. That could take up to 5 months. So what you've got to think is, right, this is happening, not complain about it. There's nothing we can do about it now. What you've got to look at doing is, how do I mitigate that risk? So make sure you've got a tenant in there that can pay the rent and can afford it, and also can afford to heat the home. Because of course, if they can afford the rent but they can't heat the home, then you're going to get damp, and then they'll get the housing officer in, and then you've got all sorts of trouble. So you've got to do that. But the other way is, you look at things like rent guarantee insurance, etc. And I'm sure that one thing the industry is getting better at doing is introducing new products and services to help mitigate risks that are coming along. So do make sure that you look out for those. You can't, as a landlord anymore, sit at home, rent the property out and stick your head in the sand. It's just not going to work. So you really need to look at basically how you're going to mitigate the risks of Section 21 going. And for some, it might actually make life easier, because if it's straightforward that you're going to have to sell that home, then that might be easier and quicker than it's been done before.
Yeah, I just want to touch on rent guarantee insurance, because our insurance partner, as for instance, Alan Boswell Group, it's about £90 to £100 for the year. It's not prohibitive, is it? It's such a no-brainer.
Yeah. And I remember going back I was at the Property Investor Show, I think, and a guy came to me, and over the last 5 years, what the tenant would be doing was just not paying their rent every now and again, and he never noticed. And he'd lost it was about like £6,000 or something like that, and he just never noticed. So you've got to keep up to speed with your tenant, making sure they have paid that rent, and you've got to be on it really quickly if they haven't. But if you've got the rent guarantee insurance, and it's crazy not to do it, really, and that's kind of not advice, that's my personal view, because if you run a business, well, you'd have some sort of insurance. I've got insurance for my business, so it makes sense.
Now, I know also in your presentation tonight, you really mentioned the importance of understanding the numbers in your portfolio, and there's no excuse not to now. We've got some brilliant bits of software like Landlord, for instance, who I know that you're working with as well. These apps are there to improve landlord productivity and efficiency and help them keep control of everything and have a better bottom line.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair to landlords in the past, when I talk to them, they think they're asking me a property question, and they're not. They're asking me a financial question, which I can't answer. So one of the difficulties we have is that financial advisors don't advise on property, and when you're looking at property, it's very difficult to assess a return on a property versus the return on a financial investment, whereas there are more tools becoming available for you to do that. And I'm afraid the 50 grand that you invested property 20 years ago will not deliver you as good a return against financial investment today, and therefore you have to check that the money you're putting in is giving you the best return you can. The government have basically said we prefer financial investment to property investment, and which is why they've increased the taxes to make it tougher and stop people from doing it. Slightly crazy move when you've got a population increase and you need more rental properties, but hey, that's the way it is. So it is definitely, you've got to get your head around the numbers.
Now,
or find somebody that knows how to.
Very much so. And just as we close out here, Kate, you always look for the positives. And, there's been a period where landlords have had uncertainty over Brexit and all sorts of things that, landlords don't like uncertainty. Maybe 2020 is going to be a bit more steady. Landlords can kind of consolidate their position, get their house in order. Is this going to be the year to do that?
Oh, well, last year, the year before, and the year before that was really the year to do it. But you know what? If you haven't done it by then, yes, definitely this is the year to do it. And I always say that the the difficulty in the property market is, and I know landlords don't like uncertainty, but I'm sorry, we live in a world of typically boom and bust. But actually, the last few years, and I do think, depending on the impact of Brexit, and nobody knows what it is, and it might be something else. It might be the awful illness in China, and that's already pulled the stock market down. Who knows what that will do to various economies? So a shock is always going to hit you. So you've absolutely got to understand, well, how's that going to hurt me, and how do I mitigate the risk? So everybody has to do that, and if you can't answer that question today, make sure you can.
The fundamentals of property never ever change, actually, when you think about it. It's a lot less expensive to prevent something than to cure it, isn't it?
So that's the best advice. There you go, you heard it here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on our Landlord
Pleasure.
2020 Vision campaign. We're closing out here at the Habito Landlord meetup, and there's going to be more of these, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. We're hoping to do them every month. So if there's a topic you fancy covering, then give us a shout, and we'll see what we can do.
And may I also just say by saying how great it is to see you so much on Property Tribes.
Yeah, thank you.
And you've generated some really good, healthy discussions.
Brilliant. Well, that's what it's all about, and hopefully it's useful to landlords as well.
Sure it is. As ever, Kate, you're a star. Thank you for joining us, and we've got another couple of days to go of our Landlord 2020 Vision campaign, so do stay tuned. We've got some really good stuff to end on. I'm very excited about this whole month. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you tomorrow for the next instalment.